Moonlight sliced through the stone walls like a blade, casting long, eerie shadows on the floor. Alicia's breath caught as she stared into the glowing crimson eyes of King Aidan, her hand trembling in his. He had promised her one night, but what was about to unfold in the darkness would change them both forever. Before we continue, please, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. The wind howled outside, a wild, angry thing clawing at the ancient stone walls of the castle. Inside, the grand hall was eerily silent. The only sound was the soft rustle of Alicia's breath as she stood frozen, her pulse racing in her veins. She could feel the weight of the air pressing down on her, the suffocating tension that seemed to coat every inch of the room. Her heart thudded in her chest, and her skin tingled with the anticipation of the unknown. Before her, a figure loomed tall and imposing, bathed in the pale, cold light of the moon. King Aidan, the Alpha King of the Silverfang clan. His presence was overpowering, his very essence a dark force that seemed to bend the room to his will. Alicia's legs quivered, and yet she could not tear her eyes away from him. She had heard the whispers of his unmatched power, of the legends surrounding him, of the curse that bound him in chains of his own making. The stories had always terrified her, warning her to keep her distance. But now, standing before him, she was far beyond the world of whispers and warnings. King Aidan's gaze locked with hers, and the intensity of it made her stomach tighten. His eyes, those glowing crimson eyes, pierced into her very soul. They were the eyes of a predator, a beast who ruled without mercy, without compassion. And yet, there was something in them that pulled at her, something dark and magnetic. "You're trembling," he said, his voice low, deep and raw, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Are you afraid, Omega?" Alicia wanted to speak, wanted to deny it, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she stood taller, though her heart threatened to betray her, pounding against her ribs as if it were trying to escape. She had never been this close to the king, never felt his presence this overwhelming. But tonight, the fates had conspired to bring her here. She had no choice but to face him, to face the truth that was unfolding before her. She faltered, her voice barely a whisper, but it was enough for him to hear. "Do you know why you're here, Alicia?" His voice dropped to a low growl, and she could feel the weight of his words, as if they carried a promise, a threat, and something else, something far more dangerous. Alicia swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no answer. She had been brought here by the Silverfang clan, summoned to the castle under the guise of a simple meeting. But she knew better. The stories had warned her that her life, her very fate, was entwined with the Alpha King in ways she could never have imagined. "I've waited for this moment my entire life," King Aidan continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "One night with me, and I will set you free from the life of submission you've been forced to live. You, the one who can break my curse. Are you ready, Omega?" Her breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a blow to the chest. Set her free? Break his curse? She had no idea what he was talking about, but the weight of the words pressed down on her like an invisible force. Her mind spun, trying to make sense of the situation. She was nothing more than a simple Omega, insignificant in the world of werewolves, destined to live a life of submission, of servitude. But this man, this powerful, cursed king, was offering her something that had never seemed possible. I don't understand," she managed, her voice trembling. King Aidan's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You will soon enough." He stepped closer, and despite the fear coursing through her, Alicia couldn't help but feel the pull of something deep within her, something she couldn't explain. His presence was intoxicating, his power undeniable. Her instincts screamed at her to step back, to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. His hand reached out, and she flinched, but he merely placed it gently over hers, his fingers warm against her cold skin. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She felt something deep inside her stir, as if an ancient part of her soul had been awakened by his touch. "Do you feel that?" he asked softly, his voice a dark whisper. "The bond between us? It's been waiting for you, Alicia, waiting for the right moment to awaken." Her heart fluttered in her chest, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she thought she might collapse. The bond? She didn't understand. The only bond she had ever known was the one that tied her to her lowly status as an Omega. She was nothing. No one. And yet, here she stood, holding the hand of the most powerful werewolf alive, a king whose curse was bound to her in ways she could not fathom. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thicker. The moonlight pouring through the high windows illuminated them both, casting long, haunting shadows on the walls. And in that moment, with the king's hand still wrapped around hers, Elysia realized one undeniable truth: this night would change everything. Her life, her destiny, and the very nature of her existence would never be the same again. "Do you trust me?" King Aiden's voice broke through her thoughts, his hand tightening around hers just slightly. Elysia nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her insides. She didn't understand, couldn't possibly comprehend everything that was happening, but there was something in the way he held her, something in the way his eyes burned with the promise of something more, that made her believe, if only for a fleeting moment, that maybe, just maybe, this was where she was meant to be. "Good," he murmured, "because once you step into my world, there is no going back." Elysia took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come. Tonight, she would learn what it meant to be bound to the Alpha King, and she had no idea just how dangerous that would turn out to be. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy, as Elysia's mind raced, struggling to catch up with the chaos of her emotions. The air was electric, charged with a tension she could almost taste. King Aiden's hand still rested over hers, the warmth of his touch sending waves of conflicting sensations through her. His presence was undeniable, commanding, impossible to ignore. Yet beneath that power, beneath the cold, regal exterior, there was something more, something darker. Elysia had always known her life was destined for something more than the drudgery of her role as an Omega. She had often dreamed of freedom, of breaking free from the chains that bound her to servitude. But now, as she stood in the presence of the Alpha King, she couldn't shake the nagging fear that whatever path lay ahead would not be the one she had envisioned. She tried to steady her breath, but it caught in her chest as King Aiden's grip tightened. His crimson eyes glowed brighter, almost burning with intensity. It wasn't just the moonlight reflecting in them, it was something deeper, something ancient. His power thrummed in the air, and Elysia could feel it, like a pulse beneath her skin. "Do you feel it, Elysia?" His voice was lower now, almost a growl, as if the very act of speaking was a battle for control. "The weight of what is about to happen? The choice before you?" Her heart skipped a beat, a chill creeping down her spine. His words had the ring of inevitability, as though the path had already been set in motion long before either of them had arrived in this room. "What choice?" she whispered, unsure if she truly wanted the answer. His gaze darkened, the flicker of torment flashing in his eyes before it was replaced by the ironclad mask of a king. He took a step back, releasing her hand, but the distance between them only seemed to intensify the gravity of the moment. "You may think you're here to break my curse, but the truth, Elysia, is that the curse has already begun to break me." Confusion clouded her mind, but before she could speak, something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped, and a shiver ran through her as a new presence filled the room. A woman, emerging from the shadows, her ethereal form glowing with an unearthly light. Elysia's breath caught as the woman stepped forward, her eyes meeting the Alpha King's with an intensity that sent a wave of dread through Elysia. The truth was clearer than ever now. This was no ordinary night. The curse had never been about her, and suddenly, the air was thick with something much darker than she had anticipated. Elysia's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as the woman stepped fully into the moonlight. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows lengthening and shifting like dark tendrils reaching for her. The mysterious figure was tall, her presence commanding, yet ethereal, like a spirit woven from the very fabric of the night. Her beauty was otherworldly, her long hair shimmering silver in the pale light, and her eyes, those eyes held an ancient power that made Elysia's stomach twist with a deep, visceral sense of dread. King Aiden, the Alpha King who had once seemed so formidable, now looked almost broken. His crimson eyes flickered between the woman and Elysia, a deep anguish clouding his face. "Elysia, this is..." His voice faltered as he turned to the woman. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Elysia's pulse quickened as she tried to process what was unfolding before her. "This is Lysandra," the woman spoke, her voice as smooth and cold as the wind that howled outside the castle. "The one who is truly bound to him." Elysia's throat tightened. "Bound? To the Alpha King?" A strange, uneasy feeling crawled up her spine as she tried to make sense of the situation. The world she thought she understood her place in it was crumbling. Lysandra's gaze never left Elysia, her smile a mix of pity and cold triumph. "You were never meant to break the curse, Omega," she said, her voice as sweet as poison. You are nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a pawn in a game you cannot begin to understand. The Alpha King's fate was sealed long before you entered his life. Elysia's knees threatened to buckle beneath her, but she stood firm, even as confusion churned in her gut. She had heard the stories, the whispers of a curse, of a powerful king whose destiny was tied to a woman of great power. But she had always believed that the curse was something King Aiden carried alone, that somehow she was the one meant to break it. Now, standing here, face to face with Lysandra, she realized how wrong she had been. The truth, it seemed, was darker than she could have ever imagined. Lysandra took a step closer to Elysia, her movements graceful but predatory. The air around them seemed to hum with the tension between the two women, one bound to the past and the other to an unknown future. Elysia's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the story, but the more she understood, the less control she seemed to have over her own emotions. The curse, Lysandra continued, her voice softening as she reached out to place a delicate hand on Aiden's shoulder, has always been my responsibility to bear, but now it is yours, Elysia. Elysia recoiled at her words, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean? She asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop herself. She didn't understand. Was Lysandra speaking in riddles? Or was this woman truly the one the king had been waiting for all along? Lysandra turned to her with a cruel smile, her eyes glowing with unspoken power. The curse isn't something that can be broken by love or fate. It was cast by someone far greater than either of us, and only someone with the strength to wield that power can free the king from it, someone who is not you. King Aiden's jaw clenched as he stepped forward, his towering form casting a shadow over the two women. Lysandra, stop. This isn't the way. But Lysandra ignored him, her gaze fixed on Elysia, as if the Omega were the only one who truly mattered. You are merely a reflection of his torment, she continued, her voice low and dangerous. A distraction for the king, a temporary fix to the gaping hole in his soul. But the real key to breaking the curse lies within me. Elysia's mind reeled, unable to process the weight of what Lysandra was saying. She had never felt so insignificant in her life. She wasn't the one who would set him free. She wasn't the one destined for him. She wasn't even the one who had the power to break the chains that bound King Aiden. A sharp pang of sorrow twisted through her heart, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, something that had been buried deep inside her, a feeling she had never truly acknowledged. It was a strength, a force she had never allowed herself to recognize. And that strength was beginning to awaken. Suddenly, the air seemed to crackle, charged with an energy that wasn't just hers. A shiver ran through her body, her fingertips tingling as if they were being pulled toward something deep within her, something she didn't understand. Her heartbeat quickened, the pulsing rhythm of the moon above syncing with her own. King Aiden's eyes narrowed, his gaze flickering between Elysia and Lysandra, confusion and something darker fear swirling in his gaze. You, his voice faltered as he looked back at Elysia. You are not just an Omega. Are you? The words struck her like a blow. Elysia didn't know how to respond. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable, than she did in that moment. Something inside her, something deep within her bones, was beginning to surface. The moonlight seemed to swirl around her, enveloping her in its glow, and she could feel it now. The power, the strength, that had been dormant all her life, was awakening. Lysandra's face twisted in confusion as she stepped back, her eyes flickering with something Elysia couldn't quite place. No, this can't be, she whispered, but it was too late. Elysia could feel it now. The truth was coursing through her veins, rising to the surface, and there was no turning back. Elysia's breath hitched as a surge of power pulsed through her body, unlike anything she had ever felt before. The room seemed to tilt and shift around her as though the very foundation of the castle was shaking, in response to the power now awakening within her. Her senses heightened, the air growing thick with electricity. She could feel the pull of something ancient, something primal, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be more than just an Omega. The transformation was subtle at first. Her fingers tingled with warmth, her skin prickling as though every nerve had come alive. But as the energy inside her began to swirl, it felt like an untamed force, a wildfire burning its way through her veins. She could feel the presence of the moon, its influence wrapping around her like a lover's embrace, urging her to release the power she had so long kept hidden. Elysia's body trembled with the strain of it all, her mind racing to keep up with the overwhelming flood of sensations. She glanced toward King Aiden, whose crimson eyes were now wide with disbelief. The tension in his gaze was palpable, but there was something else in his expression, something akin to awe. You, His voice was barely a whisper, laced with a growing sense of realization. "You're—" Before he could finish, Alicia felt herself swaying on the edge of something dark, a voice deep inside her, calling her to embrace her true nature, to stop fighting against the pull of the power now coursing through her. It was a dangerous thing to surrender to, but the thought of resisting felt hollow. She had spent her entire life in fear of the unknown, of being weak, of being invisible. But in this moment, the unknown was no longer a threat. It was a promise. The energy inside her swirled like a storm, rushing to her limbs, flooding her chest with the strength she had never known she possessed. Her eyes glowed faintly, not the brilliant red of King Aiden's, but something soft and otherworldly. The moonlight reflected off her skin, giving her an ethereal glow. But there was no mistaking the raw power that now radiated from her. "Lysandra," Alicia breathed, turning toward the woman whose cold gaze bore down on her like an invisible weight. "You said the curse could only be broken by someone with strength, but you were wrong." Lysandra's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her movements deliberate and cautious. This is impossible. You cannot." "I can," Alicia interrupted, her voice steady, though it carried an undeniable strength. The room seemed to tremble at the force of her words. "I am not just an Omega. I am the heir to a clan long forgotten, one that could break the curse forever and take its power. This power has always been mine." The realization struck Alicia like a thunderclap. She was no longer just the fragile girl who had been summoned to the Alpha King's side. She wasn't some powerless Omega meant to live in the shadow of the Silverfang clan. She was the lost heir to a rival clan, one whose bloodline had been hidden away for centuries, their power too dangerous for the world to bear. She could feel it now, the weight of her heritage pressing against her chest, urging her to claim what had been taken from her, what had been hidden. The strength was hers not just to break the curse, but to wield the power of her bloodline. It was a part of her, and in this moment, it was hers to control. Lysandra recoiled as if struck, her expression flickering with something close to panic. "No, you cannot have this power. It belongs to him, to me." Alicia's gaze hardened. "It never belonged to you. It never could." King Aiden, still reeling from the sudden change in Alicia, took a step forward, his hand outstretched as if to stop her. But the energy in the room had shifted, and Alicia could feel the weight of it. There was no going back now. The curse, the bond that had tied him to Lysandra, was no longer the only thing that mattered. Alicia's heart raced as she turned to face King Aiden fully, her eyes searching his. She saw the conflict in his gaze, the flicker of longing and pain. But beneath it all, there was something else. He was beginning to see her not as the Omega who had been brought to him to fulfill a prophecy, but as the woman standing before him, claiming her own destiny. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice low but steady, the weight of her new power evident in the way she spoke. The Alpha King's gaze softened, his expression torn. "You are the only one who can break the curse, Alicia. But it is not just mine to be freed. The power that resides within you, within both of us, it has the potential to change everything." Lysandra sneered, her lips curling into a dangerous smile. "You think you can stop me? You think you can stop what has already been set in motion?" Alicia's eyes locked onto Lysandra's, a silent challenge passing between them. "I don't need to stop you, Lysandra," she said, her voice unwavering. "I just need to take what's mine." With that, the tension in the room reached its peak. The moonlight outside seemed to intensify, casting a silvery glow over everything. Alicia's body hummed with power, her pulse syncing with the rhythm of the universe. The curse was no longer a burden to be broken. It was a legacy to be claimed. The air crackled with energy, a fierce, untamed force swirling around them. The castle walls seemed to shudder, as though they too were aware of the monumental decision unfolding in the center of the grand hall. Alicia stood at the heart of it all, her eyes locked on Lysandra, whose predatory smile twisted into something darker. The intensity in the room had escalated to an unbearable level, the tension suffocating. Yet Alicia felt the power inside her growing, pulsing with each breath she took. She could feel King Aiden's gaze on her, burning with intensity, but she refused to look away from Lysandra. She needed to focus, to understand what her next move would be. The weight of the choice before her was crushing, but she no longer feared the unknown. She had always been an Omega submissive, overlooked, but now, in this moment, she was something else, someone else. She wasn't just a pawn in a game played by others. She had the power to rewrite her fate. "You still don't understand," Lysandra hissed, her voice laced with venom. The curse is not something you can simply will away. It was forged by the moon itself, bound by ancient magic. The only way to break it is for Aiden and me to be together, soul to soul, flesh to flesh. You cannot change what is written. Elysia's heart hammered in her chest. Lysandra's words sent a wave of fury through her, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to think. She had to stay grounded. The power surging inside her was undeniable, but it wasn't enough to stop the storm that was about to descend. King Aiden's curse was more than just a magical binding. It was a deep, soul-shattering force that had tied him to Lysandra for centuries. And now Elysia was standing at the crossroads of that fate, ready to either embrace her true power or let it slip away. "What you're saying isn't true," Elysia replied, her voice a steady, unwavering force. "The curse isn't just about you two. It's about the power of the bloodline, the one that flows through me." Lysandra's eyes flashed with rage, but Elysia could see the flicker of doubt in them, the subtle shift in her posture. For the first time, Lysandra seemed uncertain. The power that had been hidden within Elysia for so long was beginning to come into full view, and Lysandra couldn't deny it. The very essence of her bloodline, the Lost Clan, was something that had been kept in the shadows for too long. King Aiden took a step forward, his voice breaking through the rising tension. "Elysia." His voice was thick with emotion, torn between something he could not control and the woman before him who was becoming something entirely different. "You don't have to do this. The curse, this bond with Lysandra, it's not something you have to face. But Elysia raised a hand to silence him. She had heard enough. She knew the truth now. She knew the choice she had to make. The curse was never just about breaking the bond between King Aiden and Lysandra. It was about breaking the chains that had bound her too. "Don't you see?" Elysia said, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "The curse is a prison for all of us. For you, for me. And I'm not going to stay here and watch you both suffer any longer." King Aiden's eyes flickered, uncertainty warring with something deeper, something more primal. He was torn, as though the very foundations of his being were being called into question. His gaze shifted from Elysia to Lysandra, then back to Elysia. She could see the anguish in his eyes, the struggle he had carried for centuries. Lysandra, on the other hand, seemed to grow more agitated by the second, her patience thinning. "Enough of this nonsense," she snarled, her voice rising. "You will never be able to break the curse. You think you can control the power of the Silver Fangs, of the bloodline that has ruled for centuries? You are nothing but an Omega." The words stung, but Elysia held her ground. She knew who she was now. She was more than just an Omega, more than just a pawn in a game she hadn't chosen to play. Elysia looked at King Aiden one final time, the choice burning in her chest. She had to make this decision, and there was no going back. King Aiden's voice was a low growl, laden with regret and sorrow. "Elysia, I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to carry this burden. I thought you were the one who could break my curse, but I was wrong. It was always supposed to be her." Elysia felt the words like a knife, the sharp pain of them cutting deep into her heart. She wanted to believe in him, wanted to believe that there was something more than the curse that had chained him to Lysandra for so long, but his words left a bitter taste in her mouth, and a sharp, unmistakable truth began to crystallize. The truth was that he had never been free, and neither had she. And if she wanted to change that, she would have to embrace the power that lay within her power that had been hidden for far too long. "No," Elysia whispered, her voice calm but firm, her eyes locking with Lysandra's. "It's not supposed to be her. It was never supposed to be anyone but me." The room seemed to hold its breath as the moonlight filled her, wrapping around her like a cloak of power. Elysia raised her hand, and the air shifted with her. Lysandra's eyes widened in fear. "I choose myself," Elysia said, her voice echoing with finality. "I choose to break the curse not by playing your game, Lysandra, but by claiming what's rightfully mine." Lysandra's lips parted in shock, her anger bubbling to the surface. She took a step forward, her claws elongating, but Elysia's power surged, a fierce energy that seemed to slam the woman back. "I will be the one to set the Alpha King free, but I will not do it by bending to the will of anyone. Not you. Not anyone." King Aiden stood silent, watching as Elysia's power swelled around her like a storm. His gaze softened, a mixture of awe and something else, hope, shining in his eyes. Elysia was no longer the timid Omega who had stumbled into his life. She was the heir to something greater, and in that moment, she realized her destiny wasn't bound to anyone else's. It was hers to create, and the first step was taking control of the curse that had shaped all their lives. The silence that followed Elysia's declaration was suffocating, as if the very air in the room had been sucked into a vacuum. The moonlight seemed to pulse, its silver light swirling around her like a living thing. Elysia stood tall, her body radiating with a power she had only just begun to understand, and for the first time in her life, she felt fully in control. The weight of her choice, her destiny, was no longer a burden. It was a revelation. Lysandra's eyes flared with fury, her face twisted in disbelief. She took another step toward Elysia, her hands clenched into fists. The air around them crackled, charged with an energy neither of them had seen before. "You think you can challenge me?" Lysandra's voice was icy, but the tremor of unease in it was unmistakable. "You cannot defeat me, Elysia. You don't even know the full extent of the curse. The power you claim to wield is nothing compared to what I can do." Elysia's gaze was unflinching. "You're wrong," she said, her voice a low growl that held both power and conviction. "The curse doesn't control me anymore. I control it." Lysandra let out a laugh, but it was devoid of humor. Her form shifted, becoming darker, her energy crackling with raw power, a visible aura of shadows swirling around her. She was no longer the woman Elysia had first met. She was the embodiment of the curse itself, a force of darkness that had enslaved King Aiden for so long. King Aiden stood frozen, his chest heaving as he watched the two women. His crimson eyes flickered between Elysia and Lysandra, torn, as though he were unsure which side to stand on. His heart clearly ached, but it was Elysia who commanded his attention now. Elysia could feel the pull of the curse inside him, the invisible chain that had bound him to Lysandra for centuries. But it wasn't enough to stop her. The power that was awakening within her, born of a bloodline forgotten, a legacy untold, was far more potent than anything she had imagined. She raised her hands, and the energy in the room shifted. The storm that had been building outside seemed to mirror the chaos inside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and for a moment, Elysia felt as if the universe itself was acknowledging the power she was beginning to wield. "Step back," Elysia commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "I will break this curse. I will free us all." With that, she took a step toward Lysandra, her eyes glowing with the promise of the power she now claimed as her own. The tension in the room thickened, crackling like electricity as Elysia and Lysandra stood facing one another. The power in the air was palpable, a living thing, alive with the fury of the curse and the promise of something new. Lysandra's form shimmered with dark energy, her eyes glowing with malevolent intent, while Elysia stood with an unwavering calm, the strength of her newfound power radiating from her like a shield. "Do you really think you can stop me?" Lysandra sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing, a mere omega, a shadow of the power I wield." Elysia's heart pounded in her chest, but her expression remained resolute. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady and cold. "You've underestimated me from the start. The curse isn't just about strength or power. It's about freedom. And it's time for both of us to be free." Lysandra hissed, her hands crackling with dark energy. She lunged forward, the air around her distorting as she summoned the curse's full force, her power rippling outward in a violent surge. But Elysia was ready. With a swift, fluid movement, Elysia raised her hand. The moonlight surrounding her intensified, shimmering with an ethereal glow that filled the room. The darkness in Lysandra's attack collided with the light in Elysia's, creating a shockwave that sent a ripple through the air, knocking the castle's walls with an audible tremor. Elysia stood her ground, the energy inside her surging with greater intensity. Her heart raced, but the power she felt was no longer foreign. It was a part of her now, a deep connection to the very earth beneath her feet, to the moon above, and to the ancient bloodline that ran through her veins. "You have no idea what you've awakened," Lysandra spat, her lips curling in frustration. She took a step back, trying to regain her composure, her gaze flickering between Elysia and King Aiden, who had been silent throughout their exchange. The Alpha King's eyes glowed faintly, his expression unreadable, but Elysia saw the quiet desperation in his gaze. "This ends now, Lysandra," Elysia said, her voice low and filled with finality. "I will no longer be your pawn. The curse will be broken." With a final surge of power, Elysia pushed forward, her energy meeting Lysandra's head-on, her resolve solidifying. The world seemed to hold its breath as the two forces clashed in an explosion of light and darkness. And in that moment, Elysia knew this battle, this curse, was hers to end. The collision of light and darkness reverberated through the grand hall like an explosion, the sound of it deafening in its intensity. Elysia's chest heaved as she stood in the eye of the storm, her hand still outstretched, glowing with the power of her bloodline. The air around her hummed with energy, and she could feel the weight of the curse, both its chains and its promise, bearing down on her. Lysandra's form was now nothing more than a silhouette, her body writhing in the storm of energy they had created. She snarled, her eyes blazing with fury as she fought to regain control of the darkness she had tried to wield. But Elysia could feel it now, the shift. The curse was no longer just a tether binding King Aiden to the past. It was a prison, a force that had held him captive for far too long, and it was breaking. "You don't know what you're doing!" Lysandra screamed, her voice a raw, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate off the walls. "You think you can control the curse, but you can't. You have no idea what's at stake." Elysia's lips parted, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth was already clear to her. Lysandra had always been the keeper of the curse, the one who used it to bind others, to control them. But now, Elysia knew it was time to shatter the chains that had bound them all. The curse was nothing more than a tool of manipulation, and it was no longer hers to control. The room seemed to pulse with energy, as Elysia called on the power within her, the bloodline she had only just begun to understand. She felt the ancient magic coursing through her veins, a force older than time itself, and she knew what she had to do. With a final surge of power, Elysia released the energy she had been holding back. The light from her hands exploded outward, washing over the room in a brilliant flood of silver and white. It collided with Lysandra's dark energy, the force of it sending a shockwave through the castle. For a moment, time seemed to stretch and bend. The room grew unbearably hot, then cold, as if the very fabric of reality was warping around them. Elysia's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as she pushed the power outward, focusing on one thing: breaking the curse. And then, with a sound that could only be described as a shattering, a crack of thunder that split the heavens, Lysandra's form disintegrated into nothingness. The darkness that had filled the room was gone, replaced by the light of the moon, which now seemed to shine brighter than ever before. Elysia fell to her knees, exhaustion sweeping over her as the power that had surged within her slowly faded. But it was done. The curse was broken. King Aiden's voice broke through the silence, low and filled with wonder. "Elysia." She lifted her head, her eyes meeting his, and in that moment, she saw it: the release. The chains that had bound him were gone. He was free. His expression softened, and for the first time since they had met, she saw him not as a king, not as a figure of power, but as a man who had been imprisoned by a curse, a man who was now free to choose his own path. Elysia smiled weakly, her energy depleted but her heart full. "It's over," she whispered. Aiden knelt beside her, his strong arms lifting her gently, and for the first time, their fates seemed truly intertwined. There was no curse now, no power to divide them, only the freedom to walk together into whatever future awaited them. The castle was silent, save for the soft, steady sound of Elysia's breath and the distant whisper of the wind outside. The moonlight had dimmed slightly, as though it too recognized the shift that had taken place. The battle was over, and the curse that had once held so much power had been broken. Elysia, still in King Aiden's arms, felt the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. But there was a peace now, a deep, profound peace that filled the space where once there had been fear, doubt, and uncertainty. King Aiden's touch was gentle, but his presence, still so commanding, surrounded her like a protective shield. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek as he gazed down at her with a mixture of awe and something softer: gratitude, perhaps, or maybe love. The air between them was thick with the unsaid, the shared moments of their journey together, from the terrifying unknown to this moment of triumph. "You did it," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You freed me, freed us." Elysia smiled faintly, her eyelids heavy as the adrenaline of battle began to fade. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered. "We both fought. But now, it's over." The truth hung between them like a promise. The curse had been broken, but so much more had changed. Elysia wasn't just an Omega anymore. She wasn't the girl who had been brought to this castle in fear and confusion. She was a woman with power, with a heritage that ran deeper than she had ever imagined. The woman she had become was no longer bound by anyone else's expectations. Aiden's hand rested on her shoulder, steady and comforting. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. Elysia met his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "Now, we choose," she said simply. "We choose our path, together." King Aiden's lips curled into a small, genuine smile. "Together," he echoed, his voice warm with resolve. And for the first time in their lives, Both of them were free, free from the past, free from the curse, free to shape their future on their own terms. With nothing standing in their way, they could finally embrace what had always been theirs. A life of choice, of freedom, and most of all, of love. Together, they stepped into the future, hand in hand, ready to write the next chapter of their story.